So Grzegorz, please,
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. I welcome all the colleagues that I saw a few months ago. I came to a meeting of a working group beginning of the year to present you the latest developments in respect to the events happening in the neighboring countries and resulting from the war in Ukraine. So I would like you to provide a little bit an update of the policies. Meanwhile, I change the configuration, the environment, my work, and I work now in DG Employment, Directorate General for Employment, Social Policies and Inclusion. So it provides me a wider perspective on all the policy initiatives and the financial framework. And this is the issue that I want to present you a little bit to introduce you the approach of the Commission evolving over the last months. So I would like to highlight the importance. First of all, I would like to highlight the importance of the temporary protection directive activated by the EU on 4th March. Besides the legal right to stay in the EU member state for an initial period of 1 year, which can be extended to up to 3 years, beneficiaries of temporary protection have access to education and training, labor market, healthcare, housing and social welfare. So far, we notice on the basis of the data provided by member states, we notice more than 4 million registration, exactly 4,188,000 registration of Ukraine and other people who stayed in Ukraine on the date on 24 February. And we notice as well that more than 10 million people came to the EU since 24 February and 6 million exited in the same period of time up to now. So we have very dynamic movements from Ukraine and from the EU in both directions. So the Commission established the Solidarity Platform with member states and other important stakeholders, including UNHCR, to discuss issues related to the implementation of this very important legal and operational framework related to this temporary protection directive. So this Solidarity Platform works very well, and it provides further guidance and further clarification in respect to the EU requirements, legal requirements or EU standards and national approaches in this respect. On 23 March, as I mentioned it in the past, the Commission presented a communication, very important policy document entitled Welcoming Those Fleeing War in Ukraine, Readying Europe to Meet the Needs, outlining the actions being taken to support member states in meeting the needs of this fleeing Ukraine and its people. So it covers issues such as immediate support, protection for children, access to education, labor market, healthcare, and accommodation. And in respect specifically to the issue of access to the labor market, on 14 June, the Commission adopted a very important communication on guidance for access to the labor market, vocational training and vocational education and training, and adult learning of people fleeing Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. So this communication provides very concrete measures as well to be supported by EU funds. And it's up to member states to choose particular measures on the basis of lessons learned and best practices that other member states, other stakeholders can disseminate through the Union across different EU networks and platforms. So we I would like also to recall that very flexible and simplified funding opportunities that we propose, and I will speak in a few minutes about the simplification and adjustment to the new situation in the EU. In the same time, over the last months, Commission didn't stop to invite member states to extend the provisions on vocational training, adult learning, so to adjust and to simplify as well this policy framework in this regard. We mobilized the European network of public employment services and the European Labour Authority to ensure effective support in this regard, in this context, on those on the ground, and this work contributed to sharing good practices. The European Labour Authority, has carried out a mapping of national measures adopted by member states to respond to the Ukraine crisis with regard to employment and social security. And this has a potential impact on the EU internal labour mobility. Via the network, we have started as well since the beginning of April a process of consultation with the public employment services with the aim, among other things, to identify and disseminate different measures, in especially access to job through a dedicated website which we created also in Ukrainian language and which is largely used as far as we notice. Public employment services has adjusted relevant processes quickly. So they introduced different features on their platforms. They set up dedicated counselors. In some countries, public employment services have set up dedicated branch offices for job seekers fleeing Russia invasion of Ukraine, and in some cases are advertising job offers specifically targeting them. Some public employment services are already present at welcome centers and services, and some are involved in joint emergency response groups or task force for people fleeing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this work, very dynamic work, allowed the services, these administrations, to gain considerable increased experience with a view of registration, profiling, and supporting the integration of people. With cooperation with a range of partners and in line with the public employment services key consideration on the labor market integration of refugees, which was adopted in 2018, the support from the services is likely to focus on different kind of trainings, linguistic and professional, and recognition of skills and qualification. And this issue of recognition of skills and qualification is very important. I would like to remind the importance of a tool which was created in the past and which was adjusted to Ukraine context. This tool is it's EU skills profile tool for third country nationals. So this could be very largely used by Ukrainians to define their competences, their skills, their potential and disseminate to allow public services to get more in-depth knowledge about the potential and possible way forward. With DG GROW, we published on 5th April new guidelines to facilitate the recognition of professional qualifications obtained in Ukraine. These qualifications give access to regulated professions such as doctors, nurses, and architects. We are following up with member states authorities to see how these processes of recognition of qualifications could be further smoothed. And we would like to focus as well to go more in depth on for academic qualifications like university degrees. Another initiative which is worthwhile to mention, it's the work with European Training Foundation, Ukraine authorities and EU member states, national authorities, to compare the European qualification framework and the Ukrainian national qualification framework from primary to postdoctoral. So this work, it's part of this global approach on qualification and skills, which is very important in the process of access to labor market by Ukrainians. So the foundation, the European Training Foundation, has established a resource hub to help both Ukrainians seeking assistance in having their qualification recognized, and other administrations or other stakeholders, social partners who need help in their interpretation. This is very important. The question of interpretation and applicability in the EU member states context. We have adjusted. We are using the potential and different platforms established under the Pact for Skills adopted by the EU 2 years ago, and the European Alliance for Apprenticeships. So this is as well another strand of work which is worthwhile to mention as an approach, very intense approach and dialogue with private sector to allow to create the right environment, the right ecosystem on access to labor market. We have focused as well our attention on the support needed for women and children. You may know that 1/3 of the people arrived in the EU are minors, and some of them are unaccompanied minors. So to create the right environment, the right ecosystem of labor market integration, specific measures for women and children are needed and supported, financial support to provide assistance, early childhood assistance, and integration in the school system. And I would like to, in this context, highlight the importance of European Child Guarantee, which recommends to member states to provide free and effective access to high quality early childhood education and care, education and school-based activities, at least one healthy meal each school day, and healthcare, and as well effective access to healthy nutrition and adequate housing. So the implementation of this guarantee should provide an assurance that right assistance and services are delivered towards minors and young people. Finally, I would like to mention the founding. So the Commission, as I mentioned, smoothed and eased the financial framework. The Commission adopted a CARE initiative, which aimed to facilitate the disbursement of money. This initiative, which is called Cohesion's Action for Refugees in Europe, was adopted on 8 March and entered into force in April, 1 month after. So this initiative allows as well to pay from REACT EU, so enough financial framework, EU financial framework resources, more than 3 billion of additional pre-financing to cover emergency and immediate needs and to help member states and regional local authorities to help the arrival of people fleeing the war in Ukraine. So as much as 1 billion was specifically allocated by 10 member states in the framework of initiative of this, in the framework of this simplification framework to cover specifically the needs of Ukrainian in the EU. Afterwards, the Commission went further and adopted another flexibility mechanism, which is called Fast Care. This initiative was adopted on 29 June, and the focus was, among others, on provision of more support to local authorities and civil society organizations, which were in many cases on the first line, on the first front of assistance and services provided to Ukrainians. So the Commission decided to allow the co-financing rate increased to 100%. So all the eligible expenditure could be covered by the operational programs under European Social Fund and European Fund for Regional Development and Cohesion Policy as well, fund, which was mobilized to cover needs and challenges resulting from the new situation. So as much as 30% of resources of this program were dedicated specifically to operations managed directly by local authorities and civil society organizations, with enough simplification, enough easing of implementation procedures, which was retroactivity regarding the eligibility of expenditure allocated and disbursed by managing authorities. So this is very important. The simplification, easing, and flexibility. It's very important to help managing authorities, public authorities, civil society, local authorities to provide the right assistance. And I think, I could close my intervention here. If you have further questions, because each of the strands, each of the aspects that I presented, it's worthwhile to pay additional, very focused attention, which would take time. But if you have specific questions, and I am able to reply, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I am in the integration phase in my new DG. So I am very happy to answer these questions. But a lot of initiatives are in progress in the development. Regarding the funds, as some of you may know, we are in the programming process. So we are defining, shaping with member states the priorities for the implementation of the funds in the period 21-27, and this programming process is very important for all the stakeholders, for public and private sector, for all the institutions, including financial institutions, to consider potential for cooperation. And I would like to highlight the importance of this process, that your potential voices could be heard by managing authorities in charge of the implementation of the operational programs in the regions, in the countries, depending on the national configuration on the implementation of EU funds. So it is important that all the actions are implemented according to the needs, to the challenges and possibilities of partnership and deliverables to be achieved by different organizations and institutions. So I would like to draw your attention on this process, to potentially catch up and use the potential of the governance and impact of the funds of cooperation with managing authorities to get funding in the area of access to labor market, entrepreneurship, macrofinance, social economy, etc. So thank you very much. Yeah, if you have questions, I'm here. I don't know if you, Kasia, you want to take the questions now or after the presentation by Magda.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have excellent speakers today, so let's listen to everybody and take the question afterwards. I know that what is a problem right now is the lack of the possibility of the chat, but I still would like everybody who has any question to just remember them, and that at the end, when we have the Q&A moment, to give the to ask the question to the speakers that are here with us today. And maybe but I will just give a floor to Magda Ruszkowska-Cieślak, who is an expert at the Chancellery of Prime Minister, and she's going to talk about the program that is being envisioned right now. So, Magda, if you could just please put your camera on, and then I will spotlight you for it. Hello. Very nice to have you with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for being late. This is kind of a connection problem. Maybe we were a bit too much protected from your meeting. So yeah, I'm connecting from my phone right now to be more effective. Thank you for invitation. Thank you for giving me a couple of minutes to present the program that we are just about to launch. This is just a pilot program, but within a much larger vision of constructing, establishing through a strategy for social inclusion in Poland, which will be, of course, a longer process. This said, the situation in Poland that requires quick actions for one particular group of people who are who will be part of the strategy for social inclusion are, of course, refugees, and well, refugees in the definition very large of the word, those from Ukraine. We called the program in Polish Wzajemnie Potrzebni, which is a bit difficult to translate into English. The idea of really establishing a program based on synergies that exist between the potential of people who arrived to Poland recently and potential of local communities, municipalities willing to host those families, and especially those who would take decision to move from the bigger municipalities to small town and smaller municipalities where the conditions for integrating families of refugees are much better than now in bigger agglomeration, where simply the overcrowding of housing, overcrowding of schools, and starting tensions, social tensions are visible right now. So the program will last for next 6 to 7 months. And will target mostly, as I said, newly arrived Ukrainian citizens, but also repatriates and also Polish citizens belonging to groups at risk of social inclusion, like, for example, single mothers, who are always groups who are struggling with getting into affordable housing and getting back from institutional housing towards the independent living. The pilot program I'm responsible for is based on an integrated approach. It aims to integrate affordable housing service with support towards job market, and also to connect the beneficiaries towards educational activities. So the 3 pillars: housing, jobs, and education. Education, of course, understood as not only linking children to the Polish educational system, but also helping adults to get Polish courses and some support with adaptation, with access to job market. Those three, and of course we think in the necessary element which will be parallel to those three will be proper information and if possible the even social campaign, so that this approach can be understood properly and will also facilitate the process. As I said, we also aim to connect to the project the potential of small towns, small municipalities. So it will be mostly addressed to local authorities and NGOs who also will be taking part in will be invited to help us with recruiting beneficiaries. With setting proper criteria for finding people who are willing to take the decision for longer to move towards another destination for longer, not only for a couple of months. So we aim this pilot program to be the transition towards mid-term and long-term solutions, because we think the temporary protection, the temporary solutions that of course were applied in the first half a year of the crisis should take now shape of more sustainable services. And we think also that, of course, proposing the integrated approach is already a bit innovation for the as approach. So we do think that the recommendation from the pilot program will also fuel the process of establishing the larger social inclusion strategy. So this is in couple of words what the program envisions, and if we can just gather questions that I could expand on some specific topics to the audience, that would be, I think, more useful for this afternoon. So
thank you. No, thank you very much. It's a great introduction to the program, and I think there will be some questions afterwards. So thank you, Magdalena, for sharing, and I hope that you can stay with us till for the next few minutes, because I would like to move right now to Sophie, who is the Senior Program Manager at European Program of Integration and Migration, which I think it's going to be a nice follow-up from a little bit more European perspective, and then we round it up with the financial component at the end. So Sophie, I'm going to pin you. So we're going to spotlight you. It's nicer said here about the spotlight. So yes, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Kasia, and many thanks again for the invitation. I must say I'm new to this group because I think some of you have already met. So it's very nice to meet you all. So I thought I would start with a broader introduction about what EPIM is, so that everyone knows who we are. And then I will dive a bit more into our work on inclusion and more specifically on Ukraine. So EPIM, as Kasia mentioned, is the European Programme for Integration and Migration. We are the only and largest private funders collaborative in Europe focusing on migration. We currently work with 15 foundations who pool funding together to fund initiatives all across Europe on migration. So among those foundations, you would have, I'm based in Belgium, so here in Belgium, the King Baudouin Foundation. You would also have the Robert Bosch Foundation. We also work with the Open Society Foundations. We were created in 2005 at a time where the EU was gaining competences in the areas of asylum and migration. And back then, funding was mainly available for civil society organizations at the national level, with barely any funding targeting EU level work. So that's how we and why we were created. We were created to fill that gap, which means that we've been existing for now 17 years. And our role, I would say, has been fourfold. It's been about strengthening civil society as a key actor within the larger migration ecosystem. I've already heard a lot about the word ecosystem in the previous presentations, and that's also very much the approach we are taking. So in practice, that has meant supporting mainly migration-focused organizations to grow and sustain their work. And we've been supporting a lot of work around both service delivery, advocacy, but also more strategic communications work. We've been supporting civil society organizations to improve migration policies and practices. We've been connecting national, local, and EU level type of work together. And we've been offering targeted support in a number of areas. And one of them has been inclusion, but we work more generally also on issues connected to migration governance. I will share with you that we are currently going through a large strategic process, which will take us until next year. And the idea is to clarify our vision, but also we've realized that a lot of the work we've been supporting has been about addressing some of the symptoms of migration policies and practices. And where we want to go next is to take a more systemic lens, which we still need to fully define. And we also want to recenter our work on the communities concerned and to put them in the lead. And we also want to look at the ecosystem more broadly and not only at civil society organizations as part of that ecosystem. So that's why I think when Kasia, you contacted me, I mean, that really spoke to us in terms of where we want to go next. So this ecosystem building dimension is also one we are currently testing under both our Ukraine response and as well as under our inclusion work. So when it comes to our Ukraine response, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we reached out to our partners in both Central and Eastern Europe and other organizations as well as our funders to better understand the needs. And as a result, we initiated a fund which we have been using since then to support civil society work all across Europe, and now more specifically on Central and Eastern Europe, which is a region we have now prioritized. So we've been supporting initiatives in many areas, many of which connect to inclusion. So that includes housing, access to employment, mental health, education. And the specificity of the initiatives we've been supporting is that they target not only people who have been displaced from Ukraine, but they generally aim to and offer the opportunity, I would say, to strengthen and improve and scale initiatives that can benefit all those who face similar needs. So being people displaced from Ukraine or other people as well who were already supported under those initiatives. And most of the initiatives we are supporting actually embed this dimension of ecosystem building. We quickly realized, and that was also quite what struck us in some of the conversations we've had with partners, is that the size of the challenges triggered by the displacement from Ukraine is so big that of course, it wasn't sufficient, and it didn't make sense for our partners to do anything on their own. And now was the time for collaboration with different type of parties, including parties that they weren't necessarily in touch with before those circumstances arose. And so that means that a lot of our work is about actually creating a space for those parties to convene and address the same needs, but in a coordinated manner. And I think, as the previous speakers mentioned, our work has not just been about addressing immediate needs, but it's very much been about already looking for what's needed now for longer term, to already address longer term needs. And many of those needs have to do with inclusion. I just want to take perhaps two examples to make things a bit more concrete in terms of initiatives we've been supporting. So, for instance, in Hungary, we are supporting an organization which is called Next Step, and it's really an example of partnership with both the public and the private sector. So Next Step is a community-led organization, and our funding goes both to short-term needs and longer-term ambitions of theirs. So when it comes to the short term, their work is very much focusing, for instance, on addressing education needs, in particular for the newly arrived, but also for the existing community. So they have an after-school community space for children. I think.
Talk about the hot seat.
Oh, I can hear another conversation in parallel.
I already muted, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Kasia. So they focus on education, so immediate educational needs. And for that, they work with other NGOs, they work with pop-up schools that emerge, they work with local authorities, they also work with other funders who are financing in the area. But at the same time, we support them when it comes to their longer-term ambitions and to address general barriers that exist when it comes to access to decent work and housing. And we support them in working with real estate agencies, for instance, to really identify affordable and decent housing. We also support them to work with private companies to find a way to obtain certify and provide certifying courses in areas where there are labor needs. So that's one example. Another example is that we are supporting the work of the Union of Exiled Students in France. And there it's really an example of partnership with the public sector and in particular universities. And I think one of the previous speakers already mentioned that. And there our goal is, again, to support them for very short-term needs, which have to do with academic counseling. So they're counseling people who have been displaced from Ukraine so that they can resume their studies. But they also have a longer-term ambition, which is to put together a university solidarity platform, which aims to connect students who have been displaced to Ukrainian teachers who have been either displaced or were already there somewhere in Europe. And the idea is that next to their studies, they're also able to get some advice and be in touch directly with teachers from Ukraine as a complement to their studies. And this is, for instance, a pilot that could be expanded to other students and professors in situations of exile. So that's gives you a bit of an idea about the type of work we support. But the ecosystem building dimension is one that we have generally adopted under our inclusion work. So we recently had a call for proposals around in the area of decent work and housing. And the idea was very much focused on ecosystem building. Actually, the whole call was focusing on that. So the idea was to promote some kind of collaboration across sectors between NGOs from different sectors. So not only migration-focused NGOs, but really all those who work, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the care sector, in the housing sector. And the idea was to support their connections with other actors, local authorities, the corporate sector, trade unions, etc., to address common issues. So as a result of this call, for instance, we have decided to support initiatives in the agricultural sector. The initiative is led by a migration-focused organization, in collaboration with a food-focused type of organization. And they together are developing a model of collaboration that covers the entire agri-food chain and involves agricultural cooperative, producer associations, the church, municipalities, and civil society organizations. The idea being to provide an alternative to address not only the symptoms of labor exploitation in a specific region of Italy, but it's also about addressing the root causes that are leading to that exploitation. So it's a recognition that this cannot happen unless they are involving all the parties that are needed for that conversation. So that's in brief what we do. I'd be happy to exchange afterwards and of course to hear about the work of other colleagues as well.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Sophie. And as it was the broader inclusion, like we heard from three of the excellent speakers about the broader inclusion, right now we will move to finance. So Olga, maybe I can have you as the next speaker, because I think the initiative that are being done are very interesting, and it's going to also go in the line with the thing. I see you right now, so I will spotlight you for everyone.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Kasia. Like Sophie, this is my first time joining the working group, so I will start with also a little bit broader introduction, but then I will focus on one initiative which is currently operational in Poland that we would like to highlight today. So I represent International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. And we are part of the World Bank focusing on supporting private sector with the overall objective of reducing poverty and promoting shared prosperity in the long term. And so we have two sides of business. On the one side, we invest directly into companies, financial institutions, and so on. On the other hand, we do advisory services in countries where we operate, tackling the barriers towards investment in private sector, towards access to finance, and so on. So we work on different levels in advisory and investment. So we work with banks and companies on the one side. We work with government sectors and companies on the other side as well. So support to Ukraine is, of course, one of our key priorities in the region. And we are looking at the supporting Ukrainian refugees and Ukrainian population from two perspectives. So we look at doing projects directly in Ukraine, and we had a huge portfolio in Ukraine pre-war, and also we are focusing on some of the countries that are main host countries for Ukrainian refugees, such as Poland, Romania, and Moldova. I moved to Warsaw a couple of weeks ago, so I could be on the ground and actually do more work being based in Warsaw. So we had the chance to meet with MFC already, and actually with some of you, I see familiar faces. We are starting to work in different directions on financial inclusion and refugees, but today I will only focus on one of them, as I said, which is already operational. And again, with several disclaimers. One of them, we understand that housing, access to education and health, and re-entry into the labor market are key priorities. We are exploring how we can support in these areas, either work with municipalities and do some other joint projects with the World Bank. But also, I will turn the focus a little bit today towards financial inclusion and access to finance for refugees. I am the only one with the presentation, so I feel really bad, but I hope that's okay. So I can share the presentation if you don't mind.
No, can you tell me if you have a, you can share it. That's great,
yeah,
because nothing works. So I'm glad that your presentation works to share.
Yeah, that's IFC, that's by PowerPoint, we do a lot of presentations online. So I will run quickly through it, because I would rather have a discussion rather than going through slides. And so Poland, of course, became the main host country. Some of the assumptions that we use for our work, and I'm very grateful to our colleagues from UNHCR. We use the data from the summer survey that UNHCR ran, but also my understanding is that there is a set of new data from August, September, which became public, I think, around September 23rd, so last Friday. So this is the data from the summer. So Poland currently hosts approximately 1.3 million refugees, and the assumption is that most likely, the number of refugees will remain in Poland and moreover is likely to increase. Most refugees, as we all know, women and children, close to 400,000 as of now of adults employed that we were able to investigate. And again, the expectation is that the population of refugees is likely to increase, because right now we see families reuniting. The winter is coming, and it will be a very difficult period of time for Ukraine. Again, the crisis continues to evolve, again, as we see from recent views, and so there could be another waves of migration. And so right now, the population that needs support is actually quite large. Again, judging by various refugee surveys that we were able to find, is that refugees currently are not able to return to their home countries, and so we see that approximately 80% of refugees are planning to stay in their current host countries, be it Poland or Romania or Moldova or further EU countries, where they were able to move. It's the main question of security, it's family ties and reuniting with the families, and getting access to employment so they can sustain their families and livelihoods. And so the expectation that the war would end soon and the people would be able to return, unfortunately, that expectation is not materializing, because we see that even if by some miracle the war ends very soon, Ukraine is so devastated that people would not be able to return very quickly. And so we are talking about a longer period of time that refugees would be hosted by countries. As the Ukrainian refugees came to Poland and now are staying in Poland, for example, their economic and financial needs are changing. So the first basic needs, as shelter and food, were covered in the first months, or were somehow addressed in the first months, and there was unprecedented support from the Polish government, from the population. The numbers we saw are really astounding, because in the first 3 months, the Polish government provided close to 15 billion worth of support to refugees from Ukraine, but also 10 billion zloty came from population of Poland. And so the support that we see from the population of Poland is also huge. And so the first basic needs were addressed, and now the refugees are moving to adaptation and further integration stages. And as they move through these phases, they actually have different financial needs that need to be addressed. And so going from getting current accounts that have been resolved, but now it's going to the remittances and how those who work and support their families staying in Ukraine, or getting access to credit, working capital, purchase assets, and so on. Basic consumption needs, home improvement, more stable accommodation, transportation, and so on. So the needs of refugees are gradually also moving, and the financial means to achieve that are not always there. And so we have a project that we are running in Poland, which is called Digital Data Corridors. The purpose of the project is to help Ukrainian refugees to get access to financial services in those countries where they reside now, through connecting credit bureau information. So I will explain in more detail, but basically connecting credit histories in Ukraine, which are available, to credit bureaus in those countries where they live now. And so we have already achieved some progress. And so the credit histories from Ukraine were connected digitally to credit bureaus in Poland, Czech Republic, Baltic states, and Georgia. So as we said, refugees need transfers and remittances. They need accounts to receive salaries, but also as they move along into re-entering the labor force and they want to increase their self-reliance and move away from the social support. And to do that, they also think about savings, they think about credit and so on. However, there are some difficulties in their access to finance. For example, uncertainty about the migration process among the banks, or unfamiliarity of the refugees with the banking system and financial system in the region or in the country. Some of the banks identified, lack of access to credit history, lack of access to reliable data about these potential customers is one of the problems. And so we are working to currently work on this program, how the information is moved. So you see that there are private credit bureaus in Ukraine that have been collecting data about credit history and about payment behavior of Ukrainian customers since 2005. So there is a wealth of information about how these customers were repaying the banks. There are private credit bureaus in host countries. So we established a digital link between them. It's again, I will speak about this later, but it's fully legal, it's fully transparent. There are no legal barriers for this transfer of information between the credit bureaus in Ukraine and credit bureaus in the host country. Then we have financial institutions, both banks and non-banking financial institutions in host countries, who can get access to private credit bureaus in Poland. For example, it's BIK that we're partnering with. And so when Ukrainian refugee as a private consumer or as a private borrower comes to the bank can go to BIK, request information about the credit history of that particular consumer, and the BIK will get this information from credit bureau in Ukraine. And so the bank, instead of starting from scratch, will actually have information about this particular consumer from Ukraine. It's not only for lending, but also, for example, if a Ukrainian citizen is seeking for a job, is trying to rent a longer-term apartment, the insurer or the employer can also get access to such information, to know your client information, KYC information from the Ukrainian Credit Bureau. So it's not only about lending, but also getting access to accommodation, getting access to insurance, and so on. So currently, as I said, there are 3 Ukrainian credit bureaus that we are working with, and we are working with BIK in Poland, establishing, and there are financial institutions that expressed interest in receiving and getting access to this credit information from Ukraine. And so once again, I will emphasize, so they can verify the identity of Ukrainian citizens when it comes to apartments, insurers, and so on, but also they can get access to credit history and credit report. And a lot of questions that we ask about whether it's the same as Polish credit report, and it is the same. So it's translated into Polish, and so the financial institution in Poland will actually get access to all the information about the credit history of a citizen. With clients' consent that they would sign as they apply for, for a loan or for a service in Poland. And it's all done digitally, so there is no particular additional hassle how it can be done. So the project started to operate in Poland on June 1st this year. So right now it is fully operational, and we are tracking right now the number of requests from Ukrainian citizens and requests to BIK from Polish banks. So the way the project operated, and so we do regular analysis of refugee flows. So we are in very close contact with our colleagues from UNHCR. We are tracking several different reports to understand the refugee flows, expectations, projections, and also seeing the profile of refugees. We are also starting right now the market analysis, that we will be doing for the next 2.5 months, of trying to better understand the profile of refugees and also their financial needs. We finished the legal framework review, so all the exchange of information is fully covered by legal frameworks in Ukraine and Poland. It's fully transparent. There are no obstacles. It's all done according to the EU legislation and so on. So again, we finished the technical framework review, so there are no digital and technical barriers to do that. So there is a cross-border exchange template that's being used. And so right now we are focusing on stakeholder engagement and awareness raising about this product. In terms of the stakeholders, as I said, we are working with Ukrainian credit bureaus, Association of Consumer Credit Information Suppliers and credit bureaus in host countries, but also closely cooperating with national banks and central banks of host countries and data protection authorities. So right now, again, our goal is to help foster communication and information exchange so that when Ukrainian refugee comes to the bank, comes to the lessor who provides the accommodation, comes to the insurer, there is access to at least some information, and the banks and companies would not have to start from scratch. And right now, we would be grateful if you could spread the information that this is already available, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Olga. I think there will be some questions, and maybe I will just invite Salma right now to talk a little bit about the innovative finance that COIS is doing. So Salma, please.
Thank you, Kasia. So thank you for the invitation. I'm also new to this working group, and we are at COIS are happy to join, especially that the discussions are focused to a topic that is close to our hearts. So I also have a presentation. Just going to share my screen. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, it's visible, at least for me. So I think that everybody can see it.
So I'm here to present our work on the Refugee Impact Bond, and more broadly to also tell you a bit more about how we at COIS try to leverage impact finance to build economic resilience for refugees and host communities. So at the agenda, and I'll try to be very brief, I'll start by a quick introduction to impact finance, but I think that a lot of the elements will also resonate with the previous presentation. Then I'll focus a bit more on the Refugee Impact Bond and give a rapid overview about our work at COIS and the experience. So what is impact finance? And maybe some of you are already familiar with these elements, but if I try to define impact finance, I'll say that it refers to approaches that aim at bringing more financing, so additional resources on the one hand, as well as better financing. So allocating funds more efficiently and more effectively to really support the achievement of sustainable development goals. And impact finance can be categorized into impact investment on the one hand and blended finance that I will explain a bit more later. And in terms of key benefits, impact finance allows to improve sustainability and effectiveness of financing by catalyzing private sector investments and ensuring allocation of funds towards more concrete and real outcomes. It also helps stimulate innovation by de-risking investment in high-impact sectors. And it also allowed to scale up social and environmental solutions by catalyzing flow of private capital towards emerging sectors and solutions. And so if I zoom in to blended finance, so blended finance is the strategic use of public and philanthropic money to mobilize and channel private capital towards development outcomes. And it rests on three pillars that you can see here in the right: impact first, leverage, as well as returns. And so finally, let's say that the key message is that the whole purpose of impact finance is to really find the appropriate solutions to bridge identified financing gaps that will lift potential barriers, deterring public and private funders from deploying capital to the right issues. And so I won't detail all these the tools that you see here, tools and instruments, but happy to answer questions later. And so to focus on the refugee impact bond, this will shift a little bit the discussion towards another crisis that is more, that is more, let's say, previous one, the Syrian crisis, but I think it also gives an overview and an idea on how solutions could be deployed to also give elements for like answers to Ukraine. So as you probably know, inclusive livelihood programs focused on refugees are key to helping both refugees and host communities build resilience for three key reasons that are first, these programs enable people affected by conflict to become self-resilient by enabling them to have a safe, dignified, and stable income. It also helps improve livelihoods in general, which allows refugees to really build economic resilience and enable them to contribute to both economic recovery and social cohesion and inclusion at host country level. And finally, refugees with this stable income that they start earning can contribute to the economic activity of their host community and host country at a broader level. That being said, livelihoods programs remain underfunded, and today securing funding at scale for refugees' livelihoods programs is still a challenge. For three reasons. The first one being that effective livelihood interventions typically take 3 to 5 years to really see outcomes materialize. And this means that there's a need for long-term funding commitments, which are often a bit, which is not the case in terms of traditional grant funding. The second reason is that livelihoods programs are perceived as too risky by traditional donors, mainly because of a limited, because of a lack of evidence. So that means that there's a need for flexible capital as well as a transfer of donors' risks to another stakeholder. And finally, top-down and one-size-fits-all programs and approaches are not effective in these cases, which means that solutions really need to be holistic and tailored to the need of the people who are supported, as well as to the local context, and which is why the impact bond can be a solution to these three financing gaps identified. And so maybe just to say a quick word on how the impact bond works. An impact bond is a financing mechanism that aims at providing an implementer with upfront capital to deploy a program. So here, social investors will provide this upfront capital to the implementer, and social investors will then be reimbursed by outcome funders upon achievement of results. So this is very quick introduction, but so again, happy to answer to the more technical questions about the instrument. Now, to really focus on the refugee impact bond, this impact bond is a multi-country development impact bond for Jordan and Lebanon. And so the first tranche was launched last year. It's a 4-year instrument. And so it is the investment size is around $10 million for a total donor budget of around $14 million. The program that is implemented by the Near East Foundation is pre-financed by DFC as well as FIRD, which is a Norwegian family office. And the outcome funders here are the IKEA Foundation, Novo Nordisk Foundation, as well as NORAD. Sorry. And maybe just a quick word about the payment metrics that are used. Here we have two payment metrics, which are the business survival rate as well as the household spending on basic needs. And the evaluator is also following a range of non-payment metrics to really build evidence around refugees' livelihoods programs. And so in terms of really operational program, this Refugee Impact Bond funds Near East Foundation to deliver a vocational entrepreneurship and resilience building program for Syrian refugees and their host communities. It is delivered in partnership with community-based organizations, and it is focused on supporting beneficiaries develop micro-enterprises with a specific and a strong focus on women beneficiaries. And so concretely, the program delivers training to refugees and host community members, vocational training, business management, as well as training around soft skills. It also provides cash grants to support the creation and expansion of their micro enterprises. And finally, it also has an acceleration component for the micro enterprises that are created. And so we aim to launch with our partner NEF the second tranche of this development impact bond in 2023, so in Lebanon. And maybe finally, a quick word about COEUS, but I think you already have these elements in the presentation sent by Kasia. So we are an impact finance firm focused on really turning projects with a high social and environmental impact into concrete investment propositions. We have two main activities, finance advisory services on the one hand, as well as impact investing on the other hand. And maybe one last word is that we are really interested in this topic of answer to the Ukrainian crisis, and we are active in the European space. We launched a few years ago 2 social impact bonds that are also focused on access to employment for immigrants that you can see here, Duo for a Job, as well as BCOP. Thank you. And again, happy to answer your questions later.
Great. Thank you very much, Salma. It was a very interesting presentation. And maybe I invite everybody to question and answers, and I will spotlight all the speakers. So I will have you in a fishbowl, and then when the questions are going to come, then I will also ask the person asking the question to say who the question is for, if that's okay. Do we have any questions at this point? Sophie?
Thanks a lot, Kasia. I actually had a question for Salma. Thanks so much for the presentation. I was wondering whether there were any criteria or conditions that are specific to initiatives that are considered for an impact bond model of financing.
Thank you, Sophie. That's a good question. I think there's no specific criteria. Our approach at COIS is really to start by the issue and design the most appropriate financing instrument for a given issue. But I think that for an impact bond, one of the key elements is that, actually, there are two key elements that can motivate let's say, push towards the choice of an impact bond is the pre-financing need, meaning the fact that an implementer doesn't have money to really finance the program upfront from its own resources. And the second point is often also the lack of evidence when really the program being deployed is innovative, brings a new way to tackle a certain issue, but that wasn't really demonstrated, and its efficacy is not proven, then it justifies the use of an impact bond. I don't know if it answers the question, but.
Thank you. Amin?
Thank you very much. First of all, Sam, I want to thank you for the presentation. It had a lot of insights for all of us to learn from. I'm working here on a financial inclusion project based on for the Syrian refugees in Turkey, and our target group and our activities are very similar to that you have mentioned, because here we are providing trainings, entrepreneurship trainings to the target group, which are Syrian women especially, and then we are offering them with credit opportunities from different banks despite them having no credit score. So I was just wondering that in Jordan and Lebanon, are you using any incentive techniques to convince the entrepreneurs to come to the trainings, or were these just based on the voluntary basis? I mean, were there any incentives given to the entrepreneurs as well?
Thank you. To be totally honest, I'm not directly managing this specific program, so I'll take your question and double check with my colleague. But what I know is that so in terms of incentives, I know that right now the program targets 30% refugees and 70% host community members. It's on a voluntary basis, and NEF selects beneficiaries based on a series of criteria, notably like vulnerability, also the ratio of women, so a lot of different points. And in terms of incentives to business creation, as I said before, there's also a system of grant making to the people who receive the training, to really incentivize them to move to this type of business creation and launching their micro enterprise. I hope it answers the question. I don't know if it was exactly that you were asking for, but again, I'm taking the question.
It was useful indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Eva?
Yes, thank you for excellent presentations. I have first question to Grzegorz. Good afternoon. My question is from the perspective of financial institution. You've mentioned that there is this opportunity. The Ukrainian refugees are given this right to stay for 1 year with the option to be prolonged. They can stay a few more years, right? My question is, do we know the conditions under which they can get this prolongation? Because, just from financial institution perspective, granting something for 1 year is pretty short. So the question is, what are the conditions under which they can get this prolong right to stay in EU?
Thank you very much, Eva, for this important question. I think it's a question of processes of decision making for granting, different rights. But I think it depends on the personal, on the objective situation. In the text, it was said, for 1 year, because we don't know how the Commission and the Council didn't know, how the situation will evolve in the future. So it was this question of, 1 year initial year and possibly extendable. But I don't know. It is important question. I see what you mean. By the way, one of the speakers presented, the data, the evidence, on the willingness to stay in member states. These are important data because I remember the discussions between colleagues on the nature of the actions, on the nature and objective of the actions to be supported by EU funds. And, it was the dilemma if we should consider them as integration actions, because, people fleeing the war in Ukraine were normally they were supposed to stay for a time of a conflict in the EU. But some of them, it's why I found this very interesting. Many of them want to settle down, in a longer period. So it is quite important, to see, objective context and personal motivation of people who are in the EU. So I think this is a little bit dichotomy between different objectives and, policy and legal framework which establish, the rights of people residing in the EU. After some years, but it's question of national competence, Eva. After some years, member states, they can grant the rights to get, residence permits to the Ukrainian people. It depends. It's really not so much, EU competence, but yeah, this is my reply, which is not very clear reply, but the situation is very complex. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Martina?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Martina from Syscredit Bulgaria. We are interested in starting providing funding to migrants and refugees, not for employment, but for self-employment. So far, the focus was mainly on the Ukrainian refugees. I understand why. Maybe I have a general question, first to Grzegorz and then another one to Olga. Maybe first to Grzegorz because you were speaking last. So what is the perspective for DG Employment? Are there envisaged some financial instruments under some of the programs, not for employment only, but for self-employment, that could be accessed by MFIs? Just to give us some insight of the plans of DG Employment, it would be very helpful maybe for others, not only for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important question. I didn't include any references to the EU framework on financial instruments, on social finance, but it exists and it is called to be developed. So as you may know, this framework, which is called InvestEU program, with EU guarantee for financial intermediaries, for implementing partners, big financial institutions like EIB, EIF, Council of Europe Development Bank, and big national promotion banks. So these are implementing partners that could allocate finance to financial intermediaries in the member states, financial institutions. And one of the important strands of this InvestEU, it's a strand for social investments and skills-related investments. It includes as well education, access to labor market, housing, social affordable housing, health-related investments. So this social window, which is granted with 2.8 billion guarantee, EU guarantee, would allow for setting up developing financial instruments in the member states. And what I wanted to react when listening to the presentation by Salma, it's to highlight, to point out the potential of this InvestEU social window, social investments window for supporting, for de-risking mechanism for financial intermediaries to build up large schemes of intervention, especially what you say, Salma, in the area of social impact investments, in the area of social impact bonds and other financial instruments, payments by results. So this de-risking mechanism, InvestEU guarantee, would allow for facilities, for less important financial risk, less important operational risk. So and I would like to highlight the role of MFC. MFC has a very important role to develop this social finance market, being in a consortium with EIF, European Investment Fund, and to offer macro advisory on macrofinance. This is very important, that this advisory capacity building actions, activities are offered to financial intermediaries, to local authorities, what Olga and Sophie highlighted as to philanthropy. We are aiming at developing a specific co-investment facility, with foundations to catalyze, to develop a little bit more and in visible manner the partnership with foundations. We believe a lot in pooling of resources with foundations with this sector. Vice President Schinas highlighted the importance of foundations philanthropy last year at the launching event of FILEA, which is Federation of Foundations. So there are different strands and different directions of work, strategic directions to work with local authorities, financial, of course, intermediaries, advisory, or firms specialized on impact investing. So this should contribute to, once again, we repeat the term, which is very important, to building ecosystem for financial for the development of social finance, on macrofinance, on entrepreneurship, on housing, access to labor market, providing assistance services to education-related activities. And I would like to finish just with what I think Sophie said, very important. And Salma, I think as well, a question of blending. So it's a question of combination of financial instruments with EU funds. So we consider this as an important avenue to develop. And personally, I will work on this direction, because on Macrofinance Center, there is an important potential to combine, finance as such, macro credits, but with accompanying actions, with business service development actions and other accompanying actions to build, social inclusion. It's not only a question of financial inclusion, but to build social economic inclusion of people, of migrants. So we need to see this integrated approach. Magda from the Chancellery described a very important project, very interesting project which aims to have this integrated approach, which is very important to see things and people not in silos, but globally, and to bring the right policy and financial administrative response to the challenges. I hope that with this response I provided you some elements on the approach of the Commission, because it is a question, of course, of financial instruments, but it goes beyond a pure question, technical question of financial instrument as such and InvestEU as such. Thanks.
Thank you, Grzegorz. Maybe some of the speakers would like to intervene or add something.
Kasia, thank you. I would like to comment on the data that Grzegorz mentioned. Indeed, more than 80% expressed their long-term intention to return to Ukraine once the conflict is over and the country is, back to safety and security. But basically the same number of people, about 80 to 85%, I think, expressed that they have no intention to return in the next 3 to 6 months due to the situation. And as the conflict continues to evolve, again, they continue to settle down, and the numbers may change. So the situation is very fluid and very uncertain, and it makes it difficult for the banking institutions, for example, to consider Ukrainian refugees as longer-term clients and build their loyalty and onboard them.
Thank you. Magdalena, would you like to respond to that, or you have a separate question?
Yes, a bit to respond also to that. We also think that since this is very difficult to estimate the number of people who would stay, I would just add that we need to just prepare variants of plans, different ABC variants, but generally the estimates show that, and different types of questionnaires also show that we should consider between 15 and 20% of people who migrated to Poland, because, well, the data I was looking at were related to Poland. So we need to consider 15 to 20% of people who would take decision of staying, even if now they are not that much yet convinced about their final decision. So this is just the comment to Olga's comment. And the second, as for to comment Mr. Grajewski comment, is the integrated approach is kind of a revolution for our country, at least in Poland. So we that's why we think it was wiser to start with pilots, so smaller scale project, to have as much conclusions or different processes mapped and reviewed before we launch this social inclusion strategy. But also in light of our discussion, it is important to say that that we really don't want to integrate or to force someone to integrate or deny their culture or other
I think Magdalena put herself on hold. Maybe another call is coming her way, because that's something what sometimes happen. Adrian, maybe I can move to your question.
Okay, do you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, my name is Adrian from Poland. I represent Youth Business Poland. We are a business incubator. We work from 2008 and we support beginning entrepreneurs, young person to help them develop their company and also find the job. So now we organize support for the people from Ukraine. We organize BEST project. It is acronym from Business Employability Skills Training. We have good SOS mentoring support, advisory point, also training and webinars. And we try to help we work with two different ways. One is to help them find a job, and the second is develop their company or social business. And also, my question is open for everybody, similar to our earlier question about some potential partnership, or do you know any organization or potential partners with which we can develop some social fund or impact fund mixed maybe loan or grants to help this person develop their company, because we think that is a big issue. Last week we have Business Mixer here in Warsaw, around 100 person come, mainly women, and it's a lot of person who's providing business in Ukraine. They moved now to Poland, and it could be a kindergarten, it could be some beauty in beauty area businesses or IT companies. So it's a lot of needs, a lot of issue. So the mentoring program is very important, but also they have this challenge that they have they need to invest some money to develop this company. So we start this project a few months ago. So everything is going well, but also we want to develop this project and this approach to help them find any finance, any funds to develop this company, because it also can hire new person from Ukraine or another refugees to and this is we think right way how we can create new workplace here. So maybe do you have any advice? So it's more than welcome.
I don't know if any of the colleagues wants to reply, because I feel a little bit, called by the question asked by Adrian. So what you indicated seems to be very promising and very interesting, and it fits well, to the plans of the Commission for the next year, as announced by President von der Leyen, to make next year years of skills. And your project, what you discuss, what you say is question of upskilling, reskilling skills of Ukrainian people. So in replying concretely on your question, how to find opportunities, I would advise you, and we can continue, the dialogue, how to assist, how to help you. You can use the potential of operational programs to be established under the European Social Fund and under European Fund for Regional Development to establish these programs. They have potential to have financial instruments to be potentially blended with EU funds. So I would advise you, as other colleagues present here, to use the potential of EU funds to have finance, financial instruments to be supported with the component of EU grants. So managing authorities, national or regional national authorities, which has the component, the priority on inclusion of Ukraine people and on entrepreneurship, on skills, you could perhaps discuss with them directly how you can fit to their approach on the programs, because it's a little bit work on case by case basis. It's not globally. It's not the Commission who will tell you need to work with this or this, etc. So I will provide you contacts to the managing authorities in Poland, and we can organize a meeting. It's one thing. The second thing, as I mentioned, EIF has been entrusted by the Commission, as well as Council of Europe Development Bank and 3 or 4 other implementing partners, to establish schemes on macrofinance, on social enterprises, on access to labor market, to facilitate Ukrainians to access the labor market. So again, we need to liaise with EIF, who is entrusted institution by the Commission to implement the Invest EU guarantee for social window, and by the way, other windows. So it is my reply. By, of course, the work done by financial intermediaries, by for instance, COIS, which is represented by Selma, it is very important to build, you know, to build partnerships and to build this integrated approach on skills, on access to labor market. Yes, I don't know if Olga, you want to add something, because I think your role is quite important as a World Bank group.
Yes, thank you. I have no solution. I cannot immediately direct you to, you know, this is where you can get the money, but I want to acknowledge that this is a problem, because the Ukrainian companies, Ukrainian SMEs, even the previously existing ones, they had to re-register in Poland, and the euro for Polish banking institutions, they are new companies. And so none of the Polish banks will start looking at them unless they have at least 1 year of operations, normally 2 years of operations. And so this is a problem. And so we can't just sit and wait and say, you know, come back in 6 months, because until then, a lot of these ideas, you know, would be dropped, and, you know, companies may not develop. And so we are working with Polish banks. IFC, as a financial institution itself, can offer some solutions that we are working on. One of them is a risk sharing facility and so on. But this is still work in progress. And so at the moment, I can only acknowledge that we see this problem. We understand that this is painful, and, you know, we're trying to develop a program together with Polish banks.
Yes. So we know that this challenge is here, and also in Poland we have initiative like Wsparcie w starcie. It's from Polish Bank Gospodarstwa Krajowego. It's a public bank, and is around 100,000 złotych or $20,000 to develop the company when you register this company first time. So, you know, it's we help with promotion this program, and also when we think about this kind of grant, we think about small amounts, around $20,000-$30,000 to just, you know, start to have for rent local, or to build something small, and after that they can develop their activities. So it's, for me, it's example the program which exists in Poland, and also just give opportunity people from Ukraine can join to this program. I know that it's not easy, but it's, you know, it's just some idea.
Thank you, Magdalena. I just wanted to follow up with you, because you were kicked out of the meeting. So if you want to finish the thought that you had. I know that Martina also wanted to ask a question, and Eva wanted to ask a question. So I have 2 more questions. But Magdalena, please.
Thank
Yes,
you. I was just not
okay.
sorry.
Maybe Martina, let's make Magdalena finished, and then we go to your question. Okay.
Thank you. I am not sure at what moment I was cut from the conversation. My mic was cut. So just wanted to make comment about the integrated approach, integrated service, which will be a bit a challenge from the technical point of view, of course, but anything that includes element of housing, and especially affordable housing, means that we need to mobilize special tools to be able to scale the effects of the program, of the pilot program. So definitely before the year 22, Poland has struggled to provide enough of affordable housing, and estimates show that there were 1 up to 2 million affordable flats missing. That means that with a flow of refugees that came additionally to live in Poland, the scale of the need would be really even greater, even more exacerbated. That's one. And the second, the fact that I think Olga mentioned, that we really don't know what would be the long-term decisions of people staying in our country, then I would respond that once we invest in increasing affordable housing stock, it will be anyway sustainable, anyway benefiting just the housing deficit that alarming housing deficit that we have in the moment. So from this perspective, we just need to start to invest in affordable housing now. It's a momentum. So it's kind of challenge that can be converted into opportunity somehow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Martina?
I would like to address my question to Olga about this digital data corridor that IFC has the initiative, because KYC and assessing the credit history of refugee or migrant is the most challenging part for MFIs. You mentioned that you are seeking for partnerships with MFIs and national banks. Is this right? And if this is like this, my question is, how could MFI become a partner, and how looks like this partnership in terms of, let's see, maybe through APIs we could connect to your pool of information to this data corridor, or and is it free of charge? Or if you could explain a little bit more for MFIs. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Martina. I think I mentioned that it's not partnerships, it's stakeholders, and so which means that we are working with a pool of banks and MFIs who can get connected to the credit bureaus. And so normally it depends on the country situation. So in Poland, it's BIK, and any financial institution, whether it's a bank or an MFI, can get access to the credit data through BIK in Poland, for example. Bulgaria, as far as I know, has not been yet part of this digital data corridors project. It's working in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Czech Republic, and Georgia, but we're expanding a pool of countries. And so I will double check with my colleagues where in this part Bulgaria is, and I can get back to you with the plans for Bulgaria, so very specifically, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. This was a general question for all the MFIs from this working group, because we are from many countries and it is useful to know which countries you are covering, just for our information. Yes, but if you could check which are exact the countries that could benefit, the MFIs from which countries can benefit from this solution, it will be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And as a segue and request to Eva and Kasia, there is so much discussion going on with so many good leads. Will you be sharing the contact information for the participants of the working group?
Yes, I think that only makes sense if this discussion that's supposed to be like a spark discussion. So that's why it's so many different kind of inputs that are not maybe very like. For me, they are coordinated, because if you're looking at inclusion and then the roles of the MFIs and the different stakeholders, it's definitely plus the Ukraine and then putting in the broader context. It's something that I think we would like to continue the discussion with you. So we will be following up and seeing how we can structure it in the future. If that's going to be certain part will going to take part in this group, certain parts going to be in the other forum, but definitely I find that all of those conversation will have a follow-up. Besnik, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Hi guys, Besnik from UNHCR in Albania. Thank you for all your presentations and the fruitful discussions. I had 2 questions, and they are both related to access to what your specific projects and initiatives are about. The first one is for Sophie, and the question would be whether NGOs or organizations that are dealing with migrant issues from Albania are eligible to access, to apply for different initiatives that you have at EPIM. And the second question is for Olga, and that would be whether the digital data corridors initiative, is that aimed only at refugees and asylum seekers from Ukraine, or other refugees also, given the right circumstances, can have access to it. So basically, can go through that credit history initiative. Thank you.
Sophie?
Thanks a lot for the question. So I would say yes, we have a broad understanding about what Europe is. So we are not tied to EU member states. So I would say yes, Albanian NGOs are fully eligible. The only thing is that for now, our only open opportunity is the funding that relates to displacement from Ukraine. We had another opportunity recently on narrative change, and there actually Albanian NGOs would have been fully eligible, but now that is closed. But in the future, there'll certainly be other opportunities as well.
Thank you, Olga.
Yeah, on our side, Digital Data Corridors was designed specifically for Ukrainian refugees. That was our first response when that happened, and we realized that this is a problem. However, knowing IFC, usually if the project is, I can't call it successful, but it's impactful, is working, we see the results. Normally we try to replicate it in other countries. IFC works and has experience with other conflict situations. And so, for example, IFC played a role in Colombia with Venezuelan refugees, in Turkey with Syrian refugees, and so on. There we didn't have similar projects, and so wrapping up, it's now for Ukrainian refugees only, but we are likely to develop and replicated solutions for other countries as well.
Great, thank you very much. I think if we have to wrap up, because we had a very intense and interesting discussion, but the time is running out. So if you have any questions that you would like to follow up with, please send me an email. I will also share all the information. So there is a follow up.